The kitchen window framed the October morning like a painting I'd grown tired of looking at. Frost kissed the pumpkins scattered across my 40-acre farm, their orange bellies gleaming under a sun that still held summer's warmth. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, and wondered when this view had stopped bringing me peace. At 62, I should have been content. The mortgage was paid off, had been for 8 years now. The farmhouse needed work. Sure, but it was mine. Every board, every stone, every memory carved into its walls belonged to me. Nancy Clark. I'd raised 2 boys here after Robert died in that car accident 15 years ago. I'd planted every apple tree, mended every fence, and survived every winter that tried to break me. But contentment felt as elusive as the morning mist burning off the fields. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. Matthew's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened with the familiar knot that came whenever my younger son called these days. "Morning, Mom." His voice carried that forced brightness I'd learned to distrust. "Matthew." I kept my tone neutral, waiting. "Listen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week about the farm." There it was, the same conversation we'd been having for months, dressed up in different words but always circling back to the same demand. I moved away from the window, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 3 summers ago. "There's nothing to follow up on, honey. I told you." "Mom, just hear me out." The brightness cracked, revealing the impatience underneath. "Rebecca and I have been working on the numbers, and this opportunity isn't going to wait forever. The tech startup scene is moving fast." "Then find another way." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them. We'd been down this road too many times. A pause, then Rebecca's voice in the background. Muffled, but insistent. I caught fragments. "Stubborn, and doesn't understand." Matthew cleared his throat. "Mom, you're too old to understand dreams like this. The world has changed. Sitting on all that land when it could be turned into something meaningful. Too old." The words hit like a physical blow. I sank onto the kitchen stool, gripping the phone tighter. Too old to understand dreams. I didn't mean, look, that came out wrong. But Mom, you're 62. What are you really doing with 40 acres? When was the last time you even planted more than that little vegetable garden? Each word was a small knife, precise in cutting. He wasn't wrong about the farming. I'd leased most of the land to neighboring farmers for the past 5 years, but he was wrong about everything else. This land isn't just an investment, Matthew. It's what Dad would have wanted," he finished for me, his voice tired from hearing this defense before. "I know you've said that 100 times, but Dad's been gone for 15 years, and you're living in the past." The line went quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. 15 years. Had it really been that long since Robert's funeral, when I'd stood in this same kitchen surrounded by casserole dishes and condolence cards, promising myself I'd hold on to everything he'd loved? "Rebecca wants to talk to you," Matthew said finally. "She thinks maybe she can explain the business plan better than I can. Woman to woman. I don't need anyone to explain anything to me." But even as I said it, I could feel my resolve wavering. Not because I was considering their proposal I'd never sell the farm to fund their pipe dream, but because Matthew's words had lodged themselves under my skin like splinters. Too old to understand dreams. Just think about it. Okay, Rebecca's really excited about the possibility of you being involved. She says you could be like a silent partner, part of our success story. Our success story. As if my 40 acres of sweat and memories were just another line item in their business plan. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen that had witnessed every important moment of my life for the past 25 years. The table where Matthew had done his homework, where I'd taught him to tie his shoes, and where we'd sat across from each other planning his high school graduation party. The counter where I'd kneaded bread every Sunday, where I'd cried over bills I wasn't sure I could pay, where I'd celebrated the final mortgage payment with a glass of Robert's best whiskey. Too old. The irony wasn't lost on me. Matthew, who'd lived off my generosity through college and his first 3 failed business ventures. Matthew, who'd brought home Rebecca 2 years ago like a trophy wife and immediately started treating his childhood home like a resource to be mined. Rebecca, with her perfectly straightened hair and MBA from a school I'd helped pay for, who looked at my farmhouse like it was a quaint museum piece and my land like it was wasted potential. I walked to the living room mantelpiece and picked up the framed photo of my boys from Matthew's college graduation. 18-year-old Jason stood tall and proud next to his younger brother. Jason had that serious expression he'd worn since childhood. My responsible one, my steady one, my adopted one. Though we'd stopped using that word years ago. Jason, who called every Sunday without fail. Jason, who sent postcards from Europe where he'd been working for the past 2 years, building his legal career and writing about how much he missed my apple pie. Jason, who'd never once asked me for money or questioned my choices, or suggested I was too anything. The contrast stung. I set the photo down and noticed my hands were shaking slightly. When had they started doing that? Another sign of age. Another reminder that Matthew might have a point about time slipping away. But time for what? To give up everything I'd worked for so he could chase another get-rich-quick scheme. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. I'd always loved this time of day when the light turned everything soft and forgiving, but today it felt different, like a spotlight on everything I was losing, everything I'd already lost. My phone buzzed with a text message. Rebecca. Hi, Nancy. Matthew told me about your conversation. I'd love to chat with you about our vision for the startup. Maybe we could meet for coffee this week, I think, once you understand the potential. You'll be as excited as we are. The heart emoji at the end felt like a mockery. Rebecca had never sent me heart emojis before. In fact, Rebecca had barely spoken to me beyond polite pleasantries at family dinners. But now that she wanted something, suddenly we were girlfriends. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to type back something cutting, something that would make clear exactly what I thought of their vision. But another part, the part that remembered Matthew as a gap-toothed 6-year-old bringing me dandelions, wanted to try one more time to make him understand. Instead, I typed, "We can talk?" The response came immediately. "Wonderful. How about Thursday at 2? There's a lovely cafe in town, Benson's Corner. I'll make a reservation. Can't wait." 2 heart emojis this time. The desperation was almost palpable. I set the phone aside and walked back to the kitchen window. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the fields. Somewhere in those shadows lay the ghost of the woman I used to be, the young mother who'd thought love and sacrifice were the same thing. Who'd believed that giving everything to her children would somehow guarantee their respect and devotion? That woman had been wrong about a lot of things. But she'd been right about one thing this land was worth fighting for. Not because of its market value or development potential, but because it was mine. Because I'd earned it through years of scraped knees and sleepless nights. Through seasons of plenty and seasons of want. Through the kind of daily choices that build a life brick by brick. Matthew thought I was too old to understand dreams. What he didn't understand was that I was living mine. Had been living it for 25 years. And I had no intention of letting anyone, not even my own son, take it away from me. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that used to make me feel alive. Now, as I stood before my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my dark green blazer, it felt more like armor than clothing. I'd chosen my outfit carefully professional, but not desperate. Confident, but not confrontational. The kind of look that said, I might be 62, but I wasn't anyone's fool. The drive to Benson's Corner took 15 minutes through countryside that had barely changed in 3 decades. Rolling hills dotted with farmhouses like mine, their owners mostly my age or older. All of us stubborn holdouts against the creeping development that had swallowed the eastern edge of the county. I wondered how many of them had children circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to cash in on their parents' life's work. Benson's Corner Cafe occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, all white gingerbread trim and hanging flower baskets. I'd been here exactly twice, once for my neighbor Hazel's retirement party, and once when the ladies from church had organized a book club that lasted exactly 3 meetings. It wasn't my kind of place. All overpriced lattes and motivational quotes painted on reclaimed barnwood, but it was Rebecca's kind of place, which should have been my first warning. I spotted her immediately through the front window, perfectly positioned at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Her blonde hair was pulled back in what she probably called a power bun, and she was wearing the kind of cream-colored blazer that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked up and waved, her smile bright enough to power the cafe's Edison bulb fixtures. The hostess, a girl young enough to be my granddaughter, led me through the maze of mismatched furniture to Rebecca's table. The scent of cinnamon and expensive coffee couldn't quite mask the underlying smell of fresh paint and forced charm. "Nancy." Rebecca stood and leaned in for an air kiss that barely grazed my cheek. "You look wonderful. I love that blazer. It's so classic." Classic. The polite way of saying outdated. I'd bought this blazer for Robert's funeral 15 years ago, and it had served me well for every serious occasion since. But under Rebecca's appraising gaze, it felt like a relic. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I have to admit, I'm curious about this conversation Matthew said we needed to have." Rebecca's smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, I thought it might be nice to talk without the men around. You know, sometimes they can be so intense about business." Our server appeared, another impossibly young girl with purple-streaked hair and a nose ring. Rebecca ordered something called a vanilla bean oat milk macchiato with lavender foam. I asked for black coffee and watched the girl's face fall slightly, as if I'd personally disappointed her artistic coffee aspirations. "So," Rebecca said, leaning forward with her hands clasped, "Matthew told me about your concerns regarding the startup. I completely understand your hesitation. It's a big decision. Is it—" I kept my voice level. "Because from where I sit, there's no decision to make. The farm isn't for sale." Another flicker in that perfect smile. "Of course, and we respect that. But I thought maybe if you understood the full scope of our vision, you might see this differently. Not as selling the farm, but as transforming it into something bigger." The coffee arrived, along with Rebecca's elaborate concoction topped with what looked like purple foam art. She photographed it with her phone before taking a sip, and I found myself wondering if anything in her life happened without being documented for social media. "Tell me about this vision," I said, though I already knew I wouldn't like what I heard. Rebecca's eyes lit up. "It's so exciting. Nancy, we're developing an app called Harvest Connect. It connects urban consumers directly with local food producers. Think of it as the Uber of sustainable agriculture." The Uber of sustainable agriculture. I sipped my coffee and tried not to let my expression give away my thoughts. "The beauty of it," Rebecca continued, "is that we're not just building an app. We're creating a lifestyle brand, and your farm would be our flagship property, the face of authentic American farming." Her perfectly manicured hands gestured enthusiastically. "We'd build a state-of-the-art facility for food processing and distribution, maybe add a farm-to-table restaurant, possibly even a boutique hotel for agritourism. On my 40 acres. Well, yes, we'd need to purchase the property to make the improvements, but you'd be a stakeholder in the company, a founding partner, really. Your name would be on everything. Nancy's Farm Fresh, or something equally authentic." Authentic, there was that word again, weaponized by people who wouldn't know authentic if it bit them on their designer jeans. "And what would happen to my house?" I asked. "Oh, we'd absolutely preserve the farmhouse. It has such character. We might need to make some updates. You know, open up some walls, add some contemporary touches. But the bones are gorgeous. It would make a perfect visitor center, or maybe a charming cafe space. A visitor center, my kitchen, where I'd fed my boys for 20 years, turned into a place for strangers to buy overpriced coffee and take selfies. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "what you're describing isn't transforming my farm, it's erasing it." Her face fell into an expression of practiced concern. I understand why it might feel that way, but think about the legacy aspect. Instead of just leaving Matthew and Jason a piece of land, you'd be leaving them a thriving business, a real inheritance. Jason, she'd mentioned Jason, which surprised me. In the 2 years she'd been part of our family, Rebecca had barely acknowledged my older son's existence, especially after she'd learned he was adopted. Has Jason expressed interest in this venture? I asked. Well, he's been so busy with his legal work in Europe, but I'm sure once he understands the opportunity. She waved her hand vaguely. The important thing is that you'd be securing both boys' futures. Both boys. As if she gave a damn about Jason's future. How much money are we talking about? I asked bluntly. Rebecca nearly choked on her lavender foam. I'm sorry. You want me to sell my farm to fund your startup? How much are you asking for? She recovered quickly, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what looked like a detailed presentation. Well, we've had the property appraised at $1.2 million, which honestly seems conservative given the development potential, but we're only asking for $800,000 in startup funding. The rest would remain as your equity stake in the company. $800,000. The number hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. And if your app fails, I asked. It won't. The response was immediate and defensive. We have a solid business plan, proven market research, and several potential investors already interested. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. Nancy, this is the future of food distribution. I thought about Matthew's previous business ventures, the organic dog treat company that folded after 6 months, the subscription box service for artisanal beard oils that never made it past the concept stage, the food truck that had been repossessed before he'd made a single sale. Rebecca, I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care. I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to me, but my answer is still no. Her composure cracked like ice in spring. Nancy, please just think about it for a few more days. Talk to your financial advisor. Maybe get a second opinion on the property value. I really think you're not seeing the full picture here. I see the picture just fine. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. And I see that you and Matthew have already spent a lot of time planning what to do with my property without actually asking if I wanted to sell it. That's not, we would never. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, her carefully constructed facade finally falling away. Nancy, Matthew is your son. He deserves better than to watch his dreams die because you're too sentimental about an old house. There it was. The real Rebecca, stripped of her heart emojis and fake friendship, the woman who thought my life's work was just sentiment standing in the way of her ambitions. You're right, I said quietly. Matthew is my son, which is exactly why I know the difference between supporting his dreams and enabling his delusions. I left her standing there in the cafe, her purple foam going flat in the afternoon light. The drive home felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting behind the maple trees Robert had planted the year Jason started kindergarten. Inside, the house felt different somehow. Smaller, more fragile. I walked through the rooms, seeing them through Rebecca's eyes, the outdated wallpaper in the dining room, the scuffed hardwood floors, the kitchen cabinets I'd painted myself but hadn't updated in a decade. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of every repair I'd deferred, every modern convenience I'd done without. My phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. How did it go with Rebecca? She said you seemed upset. Upset. As if I were an old woman having an emotional moment instead of a property owner who'd just been pitched on destroying everything she'd built. I started to type a response, then deleted it, then started again and deleted that too. What was there to say? That his wife had just described turning my home into a tourist attraction, that they'd already had my property appraised without my knowledge, that they saw my 40 acres not as my legacy, but as their lottery ticket, instead. I set the phone aside and poured myself a glass of Robert's whiskey. The bottle was nearly empty now. I'd been saving it for special occasions that never seemed special enough, but tonight felt like the right time to finish it. The whiskey burned going down, a familiar fire that reminded me of winter evenings when Robert and I would sit by the fireplace, planning improvements to the farm and dreaming about the boys' futures. He'd had such hopes for them both, such faith that love and good values would be enough to guide them through life. He'd have been heartbroken to see what Matthew had become, but he'd have been proud of what Jason was building for himself in Europe, making his own way without asking for handouts or expecting the world to owe him anything. As I sat in the growing darkness, I realized something had shifted inside me during that conversation with Rebecca. The last vestiges of my maternal guilt, the voice that whispered, I should sacrifice anything for my children's happiness, had finally gone quiet. Matthew thought I was too old to understand dreams. Rebecca thought I was too sentimental to make smart business decisions. They were both wrong, but their mistake would be my advantage because I was about to show them exactly how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. The phone call came 3 days later while I was pulling the last of the season's tomatoes from my garden. Matthew's voice was different this time, less demanding, more conciliatory. The change should have warned me. Mom, I think we got off on the wrong foot with this whole business thing. I straightened up, wiping dirt from my hands on my jeans. The October air carried the scent of burning leaves from somewhere down the valley, and for a moment, I was transported back to the autumns when the boys were small, when Matthew would help me rake leaves into enormous piles just so he could jump in them. Did we? I kept my voice neutral. Rebecca said your meeting didn't go as well as she'd hoped. She thinks maybe she came on too strong with all the business details. A pause. You know how she gets when she's excited about something? No. Matthew, I know how she gets when she wants something, but I didn't say that. She has some ideas, I said instead. Right, exactly. And I was thinking maybe we should all sit down together. You, me, Rebecca have a real conversation about this without any pressure or timeline. Just family talking things through. Family. The word sat strangely coming from him now, weighted with implications I didn't trust. What kind of conversation? Just exploring options. Rebecca's been working on some alternative proposals that might be more appealing to you, ways to move forward that would let you keep the house, maybe stay involved in whatever we build. I closed my eyes, feeling the sun warm on my face. Alternative proposals. Ways to move forward. The language of salespeople and lawyers designed to make surrender sound like cooperation. When did you have in mind, how about tomorrow we could meet at the house? Your house. Make it comfortable for you. Rebecca could bring some lunch, and we could just talk. No presentations or anything formal. The house, my sanctuary where I'd thought I was safe from their schemes. But maybe it was better to face this on my own territory, surrounded by the memories they wanted to bulldoze. All right, I said. What time? How about noon? I'll bring Rebecca, and maybe we can make a real day of it. It's been too long since we just spent time together. After I hung up, I stood in the garden for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the fields. The tomatoes in my basket were the last of the season, plump and red and perfect, grown in soil I'd been amending for 25 years. Tomorrow. Matthew and Rebecca would sit at my kitchen table and try to convince me that all of this was somehow less valuable than their app about the Uber of sustainable agriculture. That evening, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in months. I called Jason. The international connection was scratchy, but his voice came through clear and warm. Mom, this is a nice surprise. How are you? I'm fine, honey. How's Prague treating you? It's incredible here. The architecture, the history. I wish you could see it. The legal work has been fascinating, too. I'm learning so much about international property law. He paused. Are you sure you're okay? You sound, I don't know, tired. Jason had always been perceptive, even as a child. While Matthew charged headfirst into every situation, Jason watched and listened and saw things others missed. It was one of the reasons he'd excelled in law, and one of the reasons I'd always felt he understood me in ways Matthew never had. I'm having some family issues with Matthew and Rebecca, I said carefully. What kind of issues? I found myself telling him everything: the phone call about being too old to understand dreams, the cafe meeting with Rebecca, the upcoming family conversation that felt more like an intervention. Jason listened without interrupting, and I could almost picture him in whatever small apartment he was renting in Prague, probably sitting at a desk covered with legal documents, his dark eyes growing more serious with each detail. "Mom," he said when I finished, "this sounds like they're setting you up for something. That's what I'm afraid of. Has Rebecca mentioned bringing anyone else to this meeting, a lawyer, maybe, or a financial advisor?" The question made my stomach clench. Not that she said, "Why?" Because this whole thing, the sudden change in tone, the insistence on meeting at your house, the talk about alternative proposals, it sounds like they're planning an ambush. They want you on your home turf because they think you'll be more comfortable, more likely to sign something. Sign something. The words hit me like cold water. "Jason, I would never—" "I know you wouldn't. But Mom, you need to be very careful tomorrow. Don't sign anything, no matter how reasonable it sounds. Don't even touch a pen if they put one in front of you." After we hung up, I paced the house like a caged animal. Every room held memories of Matthew growing up here, his first steps in the living room, birthday parties in the kitchen, late-night talks about his dreams and fears in the den where Robert used to read to both boys. But those memories felt contaminated now, overshadowed by the realization that my younger son saw this house not as his childhood home, but as an asset to be liquidated. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house settling sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear. By morning, I felt hollowed out, running on coffee and stubborn pride. Matthew and Rebecca arrived exactly at noon, and I could tell immediately that something was different. Rebecca's smile was even brighter than usual, and she carried a large tote bag that looked suspiciously like it contained more than just sandwiches. Matthew kept checking his phone, and there was a nervous energy about him that reminded me of the way he'd fidgeted before school presentations. "Mom, you look great," he said, giving me a hug that felt rehearsed. "Thanks for agreeing to do this." Rebecca bustled into the kitchen like she owned it, unpacking containers of what looked like expensive takeout from the bag. "I brought lunch from that new organic place in town. I thought you'd appreciate the farm-to-table concept." Farm-to-table. Even their lunch was a sales pitch. We made small talk while Rebecca arranged the food on my good plates, the ones Robert's mother had given us for our wedding. Matthew complimented the house as if he were seeing it for the first time instead of having grown up here. Rebecca admired my coffee mugs, asking where I'd gotten them. Though she'd drunk from the same set at every family dinner for 2 years, it all felt like theater, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. "So," Matthew said as we sat down to eat, "I wanted to start by apologizing for that comment I made about you being too old to understand dreams. That was out of line." "It was," I agreed. "I was frustrated, and I took it out on you. And that wasn't fair. You've always supported my dreams, even when they didn't work out." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I don't want money or business to come between us." The touch felt foreign now, manipulative. I resisted the urge to pull my hand away. "I appreciate that. Matthew?" Rebecca leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Nancy, after our conversation the other day, I realized I approached this all wrong. I was so excited about the business opportunity that I forgot this is about so much more than money. It's about family and legacy, and respecting what you've built here." Here it comes, I thought. "So, we've been working on some alternative approaches that might address your concerns," she continued. "What if instead of selling the entire property, we developed just a portion of it? We could build the processing facility on the back 20 acres, leave the house and the front fields exactly as they are." Matthew nodded enthusiastically. "You'd still own the farmhouse and the land around it. We'd just be your business partners on the commercial side." "Business partners," I repeated. "Equal partners." "Well, not exactly equal," Rebecca said. "You'd retain majority ownership, of course, but we'd handle all the operations, all the business decisions. You wouldn't have to worry about any of that. I wouldn't have to worry about business decisions regarding my own property. How generous of them. There's just one small thing, Matthew said, and I saw him glance at Rebecca. To move forward with the permits and zoning applications, we'd need you to sign some preliminary agreements. Nothing binding, he added quickly. Just paperwork to get the process started. Rebecca was already reaching into her tote bag. Our lawyer drew up some documents, very basic stuff, really, just formalizing our partnership and giving us permission to begin the application process. She pulled out a manila folder thick with papers along with, just as Jason had predicted, an expensive-looking pen. It's mostly legal boilerplate, Matthew said, sliding the folder across the table to me. But having everything in writing will make the whole process smoother. I stared at the folder without touching it. Inside were the papers that would sign away my independence, my autonomy, my right to make decisions about my own land. They dressed it up in the language of partnership and respect. But the intent was the same as Rebecca's original proposal. They wanted control. I'd like to review these with my own lawyer first, I said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Of course, Rebecca said, though her smile had gone rigid. But the thing is, we have a pretty tight timeline on the permits. If we don't file the initial applications by the end of this week, we'll miss the window for spring construction. Spring construction that I haven't agreed to, I pointed out. Matthew's facade finally cracked. Mom, come on. We've bent over backward to accommodate your concerns. We're offering to let you keep the house, to stay involved in decisions. What more do you want? What I wanted was for my son to stop treating me like an obstacle to his success. What I wanted was for him to remember that this land wasn't just real estate. It was the place where I'd nursed him through chickenpox and helped him with math homework and taught him to drive on the old dirt road behind the barn. What I wanted was for the boy I'd raised to show up and tell these strangers to get out of his mother's house. But that boy was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. I want time to think, I said. Rebecca's mask slipped entirely. Nancy, with all due respect, how much more time do you need? We've explained the opportunity. We've addressed your concerns. We've restructured the entire deal to meet your needs. At some point, you have to trust us. Trust. The word felt like a slap. I need to ask you both to leave, I said quietly. Matthew stared at me. Mom, leave now. Now. They gathered their papers and their fancy lunch containers, and I sat at my kitchen table, watching my son choose a business venture over his mother's wishes. When the door closed behind them, the house felt both empty and full. Empty of the people I'd loved, full of the ghosts of who they used to be. I poured myself another glass of Robert's whiskey, even though it was barely past 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Outside, the October light was fading toward evening, and I realized I'd made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call the one person I knew I could trust, the one person who'd never asked me for anything except the chance to be my son. It was time to call Jason home. The call to Jason took 3 attempts to get through. When his voice finally came across the crackling international line, it carried an urgency that matched my own. Mom, what's wrong? You never call this late. It was nearly midnight in Prague, but I'd been too wound up to calculate time zones. The whiskey had helped steady my nerves, but it hadn't dulled the sharp edges of my anger. They tried to ambush me today, I said without preamble. Legal papers, high-pressure tactics. They wanted me to sign away development rights without even reading the documents. A long pause. Then, Jesus, Mom, are you okay? I'm furious, but I'm okay. I walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the moonlit fields. Jason, I need you to come home. I'm already looking at flights. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it made my knees weak. You don't even know what I'm asking yet. You're asking for help. That's enough. I could hear the sound of typing in the background. There's a flight out of Prague tomorrow evening that gets into Chicago Thursday morning. I can be at the farm by Thursday afternoon. Jason, your work. Can wait. Mom, you raised me. You never once made me feel like anything less than your real son." He stopped, and I knew he was thinking of Matthew, who'd spent their childhood reminding Jason he was adopted whenever they fought. "You never once asked me for anything. If you're asking now, it's serious." After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, surrounded by the silence of the old house. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe properly. Jason was coming home. Whatever Matthew and Rebecca had planned next, I wouldn't face it alone. The next day passed in a strange suspension of time. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, as if Jason were bringing important guests instead of just himself. I baked his favorite apple pie using fruit from the trees Robert had planted 20 years ago. I aired out his old room, the one he'd kept neat as a pin even as a teenager. So different from Matthew's perpetual disaster zone down the hall. Rebecca called twice and sent 4 text messages, each one more insistent than the last. The messages evolved from friendly check-ins, "Just wanted to see how you're feeling about everything," to barely concealed threats. "The permit deadline is Friday. Nancy, we really need to move forward." I ignored them all. Matthew called once, his voice tight with frustration. "Mom, Rebecca says you're not returning her calls. What's going on?" "I told you both I needed time to think." "How much time?" "We have real deadlines here." "Your deadlines aren't my problem. Matthew." The silence that followed was so long I thought he'd hung up. "Fine," he said finally. "But don't come crying to us when you're sitting alone in that house, wondering what you could have built with your life instead of just existing." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Existing. As if the 25 years I'd spent creating a home, raising children, building a life from scratch was somehow less valuable than their app idea. "Goodbye, Matthew," I said, and hung up before he could respond. Thursday afternoon, I stood on the front porch, watching for Jason's rental car, my heart hammering with anticipation and nerves. When the silver sedan finally appeared at the end of the long driveway, I had to grip the porch railing to keep from running down to meet him like I had when he was a boy coming home from school. Jason climbed out of the car looking older than his 32 years, wearing a charcoal gray suit that spoke of European tailoring and success. But when he saw me, his face broke into the same smile he'd worn at 7 years old, and suddenly he was my little boy again, the one who'd asked me every night if I was sure I wanted to keep him forever. "Mom." He wrapped me in a hug that smelled of airplane air and expensive cologne, but underneath it all, he still smelled like Jason, like home. "You look so grown up," I said, pulling back to study his face. The soft roundness of childhood was gone, replaced by sharp cheekbones and the kind of confidence that came from succeeding on his own terms. "And tired." "That's a long flight, worth every minute." He looked past me at the house, and his expression grew soft. "God, I miss this place. It looks exactly the same. Some things don't need to change." He caught the underlying meaning and nodded grimly. "Tell me everything from the beginning." We sat at the kitchen table, where I'd fed him countless meals, and I told him the whole story again. This time, the details felt sharper, more painful. Hearing myself describe Matthew's words, "too old to understand dreams," and Rebecca's manipulative lunch made me realize how thoroughly they'd tried to gaslight me into believing I was the problem. Jason listened with the focused attention of the lawyer he'd become, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes on a legal pad he'd pulled from his briefcase. When I finished, he sat back and shook his head. "Mom, what they're trying to do isn't just morally wrong. Some of it might actually be illegal. The pressure tactics, the rushed timeline, trying to get you to sign documents without legal review." He tapped his pen against the table. "It sounds like they're either desperate or they've got investors breathing down their necks, or both." "Probably both." He studied his notes. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" It was such a simple question, but it contained multitudes. What did I want to punish Matthew for his cruelty? To teach Rebecca that not everything was for sale? To protect the land Robert and I had loved? "I want them to understand that I'm not a victim," I said finally. I want them to know that underestimating me was a mistake. Jason's smile was sharp as a blade. Then let's give them exactly what they're asking for. What do you mean? They want a meeting with legal documents, fine. Let's have a meeting. He pulled out his phone. What's Rebecca's number? I think it's time we called their bluff. I gave him the number, and he dialed with the confidence of someone accustomed to making calls that changed people's lives. Rebecca. This is Jason Baldwin, Nancy's son. I understand you've been trying to reach my mother about a business proposition. His voice was perfectly professional, giving no hint of his true feelings. Yes, I just got back from Europe. I'm an attorney specializing in international property law. A pause. Actually, I think a meeting would be an excellent idea. My mother has been telling me about your startup, and I'd love to discuss the legal implications of your partnership proposal. I could hear Rebecca's excited voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. 2:00. Excellent. Oh, and Rebecca, you might want to bring your lawyer and your bank manager. This is going to be a comprehensive discussion about the future of my mother's property, and I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what's at stake. After he hung up, I stared at him. Jason, what are you planning? Justice, he said simply. Mom, they think you're a lonely old woman they can manipulate into giving up your life's work. They think because I'm adopted, I don't really count as family. They think because I've been in Europe, I don't understand the situation here. His eyes hardened. They're wrong on all counts. That evening, as we shared the apple pie I'd baked, Jason told me about his work in Prague, about the complex international real estate deals he'd been negotiating, about the reputation he'd built for protecting clients from exactly the kind of predatory schemes Matthew and Rebecca were running. I've seen this before, he said. Family members who think they can pressure elderly relatives into bad deals because they assume no one will fight back. The difference is, those other clients were strangers. This is personal. Jason, I don't want you to do anything that could hurt your career. Mom. He reached across the table and took my hand. Do you remember what you told me the night before my college graduation? I shook my head. You said that success without integrity was just failure with better marketing. You said that the measure of a person wasn't what they could take, but what they were willing to protect. His grip tightened. You protected me my whole life. You protected this farm, this family, this legacy. Now it's my turn to protect you. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Down the hall, Jason was probably reviewing legal documents and preparing for tomorrow's confrontation, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I had an ally, not just someone on my side, but someone who understood exactly what we were fighting for. In the morning, Jason appeared at breakfast wearing another impeccable suit. This one, navy blue with a silver tie that caught the light like armor. He'd transformed overnight from my beloved son into something more formidable, a weapon honed by years of legal training and international experience. How do you want to play this? He asked, spreading papers across the kitchen table. I want them to understand that their time of underestimating me is over, I said. I want them to realize that family loyalty isn't a weakness they can exploit. It's a strength they never saw coming. Jason smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like Robert. The same quiet confidence, the same sense of justice that ran deeper than personal gain. Then let's show them what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness, he said. Let's show them what real family looks like. Outside, the October afternoon was crisp and bright, the kind of day that made everything look possible. In a few hours, Matthew and Rebecca would walk into my house, expecting to find a frightened old woman ready to surrender her independence. Instead, they were going to meet their match. At exactly 2:00. I watched from the living room window as 2 cars pulled into my driveway. Matthew and Rebecca climbed out of their black BMW, followed by a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase and a woman with a tablet who could only be the bank manager. They'd brought their entire arsenal, just as Jason had predicted. 4 against 1, I murmured. They really think they have me cornered. Jason appeared beside me, adjusting his cufflinks with the calm precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. 4 against 2, he corrected, and they have no idea what they're walking into. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me like armor. This was it, the culmination of weeks of manipulation and months of growing resentment, the end of my role as the accommodating mother who could be taken for granted. I opened the door to find Matthew wearing his most charming smile, the one that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. Behind him, Rebecca practically vibrated with excitement, while their companions hung back with the professional courtesy of people accustomed to closing deals. "Mom, you look wonderful," Matthew said, stepping forward for a hug that I didn't return. "Thanks for agreeing to this meeting. I think today is going to change everything for our family." "I'm sure it will," I replied evenly. "Please come in." Rebecca introduced the man as Howard Peterson, their attorney, and the woman as Sandra Miller from First National Bank. Both shook my hand with the firm grip of people who were used to intimidating elderly clients into submission. "Mrs. Clark," Peterson said, "I want you to know how excited we are about this venture. It's rare to see a family come together around such an innovative opportunity." Family. There was that word again, weaponized with surgical precision. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Can I get anyone coffee?" They declined, too eager to get to business. Rebecca spread her materials across my coffee table, the same table where I'd served countless Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations, now transformed into a corporate boardroom. "Nancy," Rebecca began, "I know yesterday didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped, but I think you'll be pleased with the revisions we've made. We've restructured everything to give you even more control." "Actually," I interrupted, my voice carrying across the room like a bell. "Before we begin, I should mention that I've brought my own legal counsel." The temperature in the room plummeted. Matthew's head snapped up. "Your what?" "My attorney. I hope you don't mind. I know how important it is to have proper legal representation for these kinds of discussions." Rebecca's smile became brittle. "Of course not. Where is he?" "She," I corrected, then called toward the kitchen. "Jason, could you join us?" I watched their faces as Jason walked into the room, and the moment of confusion was almost worth the weeks of torment they'd put me through. Matthew blinked rapidly as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Rebecca's mouth actually fell open. "Jason," Matthew managed, "what are you doing here?" "Representing my mother's interests," Jason replied smoothly, settling into the chair beside me with the fluid grace of someone completely in control. He pulled out his own leather portfolio and placed it on the table with deliberate care. "Jason Baldwin, Clark Family Legal Counsel, specializing in international property law." Peterson leaned forward, studying Jason with the wariness of a professional recognizing serious competition. "Clark Family Legal Counsel. I wasn't aware Mrs. Clark had retained an attorney." "She has now," Jason said. "I flew in from Prague specifically to review the terms of your proposed partnership agreement." He opened his portfolio and withdrew a thick stack of papers. "I've taken the liberty of conducting some preliminary research into your business model and financial backing." Rebecca had gone pale. "Jason, this is really between Nancy and Matthew. It's a family matter." Jason's smile was razor sharp. "You're absolutely right. Rebecca, it is a family matter, and I am family." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I saw Matthew flinch, remembering all the times he'd told Jason he wasn't real family because he was adopted, all the casual cruelties that had driven Jason to excel, to prove himself worthy of a love that should have been unconditional. "Now then," Jason continued, pulling out a pair of reading glasses that made him look even more formidable, "let's discuss your business proposal. I'm particularly interested in your funding model and your projected timeline for profitability." Peterson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should start with the property development agreement." "Oh, we'll get to that," Jason said. "But first, I'd like to understand exactly what my mother would be investing in." He turned to Sandra Miller. "Ms. Miller, You represent First National Bank. What's your institution's position on this venture? Miller shifted uncomfortably. We're prepared to offer a construction loan based on the property as collateral. Collateral that my mother would provide while assuming all the risk. Jason made a note on his legal pad. And if the business fails, who's responsible for the loan? Well, the property owners would be the ones liable for repayment. My mother alone, another note. Mr. Peterson, have you advised your clients about their personal liability in this venture? Peterson's professional composure was beginning to crack. The liability structure is clearly outlined in the partnership documents, which I've reviewed thoroughly. Jason pulled out another set of papers. I've also compiled some interesting background information on your client's previous business ventures. Rebecca went rigid. What kind of background information? Public records, court filings, the kind of due diligence any responsible attorney would conduct. Jason's voice remained perfectly pleasant. For instance, Matthew, I was fascinated to learn about your organic dog treat company, specifically how it folded owing $47,000 to suppliers who were never paid. Matthew turned red. That was different. And your beard oil subscription service, the one that took advanced payments from customers for products that were never delivered. Jason turned a page. 14 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau, 3 potential lawsuits that were settled out of court. Jason, stop, Matthew said, his voice cracking. And then there's the food truck, repossessed after 3 months for non-payment of the loan. Jason looked directly at me. A loan that was co-signed by your mother. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the last vestiges of my maternal guilt crumble into dust. Here was the pattern laid bare, Matthew taking from me, failing, and leaving me to clean up the mess, over and over again. The point is, Jason continued, my mother has already funded your entrepreneurial dreams to the tune of approximately $73,000 over the past 5 years, money that was never repaid, money that came from her retirement savings, her emergency fund, mortgage payments that she deferred to help you. Rebecca was staring at Matthew in horror. Clearly, she'd never known the full extent of his financial dependence on me. So, when you come here today, Jason said, his voice hardening, asking her to risk her home, her land, her entire life's work on another one of your business ventures. You'll forgive me if I'm somewhat skeptical. Peterson tried to rally. These past ventures are irrelevant to the current proposal. Are they? Jason pulled out yet another document. Because I've also done some research into Harvest Connect, your supposed startup. Interesting name, considering it was already trademarked by a company in Oregon 2 years ago, a company that's currently suing 17 different entities for trademark infringement. Rebecca's face had gone from pale to green. We can work around that. Can you? Because according to the USPTO database, your trademark application was rejected last month, which means every piece of marketing material you've shown my mother, every business plan with that name, is legally worthless. Sandra Miller was already packing up her tablet. Mr. Peterson, I think we need to step outside and discuss. No, Jason said firmly. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now, because my mother deserves to hear exactly what kind of deal you were trying to pressure her into. He stood up, and suddenly the room felt smaller, as if his presence had expanded to fill every corner. You wanted her to sign over development rights to her property for a business that doesn't legally exist, backed by people with a proven track record of failure and fraud, funded by a loan that would make her personally liable for every penny if it failed. It's not fraud, Matthew started. Isn't it? Jason's voice cut like ice. Pressuring an elderly property owner to sign legal documents without proper legal review, using emotional manipulation and family relationships to create a coercive environment, misrepresenting the financial risks and legal obligations involved. Peterson was gathering his papers. I think we should postpone this discussion until we can. There won't be another discussion, I said, standing up beside Jason. My voice was steady. stronger than it had been in months. "I want all of you to leave my house now." Rebecca turned to me with desperate eyes. "Nancy, please, you don't understand what this means for our future." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You saw an old woman living alone on valuable land, and you thought you could manipulate her into giving up everything she'd worked for. You thought because I loved my son, I'd be too weak to say no." Matthew was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Mom, I never meant—" "Yes, you did." The words came out quietly, but they carried the weight of years of accumulated hurt. "You meant every word you said about me being too old to understand dreams. You meant to pressure me into signing those papers. You meant to take my home and turn it into your personal ATO." "That's not—" "It is exactly what you meant." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. "And now I want you to leave, all of you." They filed out in silence, Sandra Miller first, eager to escape the wreckage of what she'd thought would be an easy deal. Peterson followed, already on his phone, probably calling his malpractice insurance. Rebecca paused at the threshold, looking back at me with something that might have been respect. Matthew was the last to leave. At the door, he turned back one final time. "Mom, Goodbye, Matthew." I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the strength drain out of my legs. Jason was beside me instantly, his arm around my shoulders. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood up to them." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." Outside, I heard car engines starting, the sound of tires on gravel as my younger son drove away, probably forever. The silence that followed should have felt empty, but instead it felt clean, pure. "What happens now?" I asked. Jason smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached his eyes. "Now we have some apple pie and talk about the future, your future, the one you get to choose for yourself." Back in the kitchen, over warm slices of pie and coffee, Jason's professional demeanor softened. He was just my boy again, talking about his work in Prague, his apartment overlooking a centuries-old square, the Czech girlfriend who taught English at the university. "I didn't know you had a girlfriend," I said, feeling a twinge of hurt that he'd kept this from me. "It's new, just a few months. I was going to tell you at Christmas when I brought her home to meet you." "You're coming home for Christmas." "Of course I am. Did you think I wouldn't—" I hadn't been sure. The last 2 Christmases, Jason had been too busy with work to make the trip. Matthew and Rebecca had come, filling the house with their glossy presence, making me feel like a guest in my own home. "I thought maybe you'd outgrown this place," I admitted. Jason's face grew serious. "Mom, this will always be home to me, not because of the property value or the acreage, but because you're here, because this is where I learned what family really means." He reached for his briefcase and pulled out a folder, not the slick, corporate one he'd used for the confrontation with Matthew, but a worn leather one that looked like it had traveled the world with him. While I was preparing for today, I found something else, something about Matthew that I think you should know. "I'm not sure I can take any more revelations today," I said, only half joking. "This one's important." He opened the folder and spread out several documents. I was digging into Matthew's financial history, trying to establish a pattern of irresponsible behavior. What I found was something else entirely. The papers in front of me were bank statements, loan applications, investment reports. My eyes skimmed over them, not comprehending. "Jason, what am I looking at?" "Matthew's been trying to start businesses since college, right? Each one a bigger failure than the last." I nodded. But what struck me as odd was the timing. Every new venture seemed to coincide with a major life event of yours. The dog treat company launched right after Dad died. The beard oil subscription started the month you paid off the mortgage. The food truck appeared right around the time you were thinking about selling a small parcel of land to fund your retirement. I felt my blood run cold. "You're saying he was deliberately timing his ventures to coincide with when I had money available?" "I'm saying it's a pattern that continued when he met Rebecca. She comes from old money, though not as much as she pretends. Her family cut her off after a series of bad investments. She needed a fresh start. Matthew needed a connection to the kind of people who might actually fund his ideas. A match made in heaven, I said bitterly. More like a match made in desperation. They've been pitching this app idea to investors for months without success. Their only real asset is Rebecca's MBA and her connections. But those connections are getting tired of hearing from her. So they turned to me. To your land, Jason corrected. It was probably Rebecca's idea. She would have seen the property as an untapped resource, a way to leverage real estate into the startup capital they couldn't raise elsewhere. But the name Harvest Connect was already taken. Jason nodded. They never bothered to check, or maybe they did, and they thought they could just change it later. The point is, this wasn't just about starting a business. This was about finding a quick fix for their financial problems. He pulled out one more document, this one showing a series of trademark searches. Here's the kicker. When they found out the trademark was taken, they applied for a new one, Clark Farm Collective. They were already planning to use your name as their brand, even before they approached you. I stared at the paper, at the familiar lines of Matthew's signature next to Rebecca's. The date on the application was 3 months ago, long before they'd ever mentioned selling the farm to me. They were planning this all along, I whispered. Before the phone call, before the cafe meeting, they already had it all worked out. And they thought they could manipulate you into going along with it, Jason said. They underestimated you, Mom. They thought because you're older, because you love Matthew, because you live alone out here, that you'd be an easy mark. The realization should have hurt, but instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The confusion and betrayal of the past weeks crystallized into something harder, clearer, not just anger but resolve. What do we do now? I asked again. Jason gathered the papers, tucking them back into his folder. That depends on what you want. We could pursue legal action. There's enough here to make a case for attempted fraud. We could go public, warn others about their schemes, or we could just walk away, secure in the knowledge that we've protected what matters. I thought about it, looking around at the kitchen where I'd raised my boys, where I'd weathered storms both literal and figurative. This was my home, my legacy. No one could take it from me unless I allowed them to. I want to protect what's mine, I said finally, not just for now, but for the future. I want to make sure this can never happen again, to me or to anyone else who might inherit this land someday. Jason nodded, his expression solemn. Then I think it's time we talked about setting up a trust. 3 days after their humiliating retreat from my house, Matthew called. I was in the garden, planting spring bulbs that wouldn't bloom until long after winter had come and gone, a testament to my faith in the future. When I saw his name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But Jason, who was sitting on the porch swing with his laptop, caught my eye and nodded. "Hello, Matthew," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom," he sounded different, subdued, perhaps even chastened. "I think we need to talk. Just you and me this time. No Rebecca. No lawyers." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. The late October sun felt warm on my back, a false promise of summer that would soon give way to the inevitable chill of approaching winter. "I'm listening. Not over the phone, in person. I'd like to come by tomorrow, if that's okay." I looked at Jason again. He raised an eyebrow but shrugged, deferring to my judgment. "Fine, 10 o'clock. And Matthew?" "Come alone." "I will." "Thank you, Mom." After I hung up, Jason set his laptop aside. "What do you think he wants?" "To apologize, maybe, or to try another angle." I pulled off my gardening gloves. "Either way, I want to hear what he has to say." "Are you sure?" After everything they tried to pull. "He's still my son, Jason." The words caught in my throat. "No matter what he's done, I need to at least listen." Jason's expression softened. "I understand, and I'll be right here if you need me." That evening, We went over the draft of the trust documents that Jason had been preparing. The legal language was dense, but the purpose was clear: to protect the farm from being sold, subdivided, or developed for at least 20 years after my death. The land would pass to both my sons equally, but with strict limitations on what they could do with it. "It's a living trust," Jason explained. "You maintain full control during your lifetime. You can amend it, revoke it, whatever you want. But after you're gone, these provisions kick in to ensure your wishes are respected. And what about after the 20 years? That's up to you. We could extend the protections indefinitely, or we could allow your heirs to make their own decisions at that point. The important thing is that it gives the land time to become something more than just a financial asset to whoever inherits it." I thought about it, imagining the farm 20 years from now. Would Matthew's children, if he ever had any, appreciate the history of this place? Would the world even value family farms anymore? Or would everything be corporate agribusiness by then? Let's set it for 20 years, I decided. After that, I have to trust that whoever owns this land will make the right choices. We can't control everything forever. Jason nodded, making a note. That's wise. Mom, the trust should protect, not imprison. We worked late into the night, going over every detail, making sure the document reflected exactly what I wanted. It felt strange to be planning for a time when I wouldn't be here anymore, but also deeply satisfying. I was taking control of my legacy, ensuring that the farm Robert and I had loved would endure, at least for a while. Matthew arrived precisely at 10 the next morning. He came alone, as promised, driving an older sedan I'd never seen before instead of the flashy BMW he shared with Rebecca. He looked different too, more rumpled, less polished. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. "Mom," he said as I opened the door. No hug this time, no presumption of welcome, just my name, spoken with an uncertainty I hadn't heard from him in years. "Come in," I said. "Jason's in town meeting with the bank. It's just us." I decided not to tell him about the trust yet. Better to hear what he had to say first, to understand his purpose in coming here. We sat at the kitchen table, that same battlefield where so many of our recent confrontations had played out. I offered coffee, which he accepted gratefully, wrapping his hands around the mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild day. "I owe you an apology," he began, staring into his coffee rather than meeting my eyes. "What Rebecca and I tried to do, it was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally wrong." I said nothing, waiting. We were desperate. He glanced up, then back down. The app was our last chance. We've been burning through money for months, and Rebecca's family cut her off after her last failed venture. We needed startup capital, and we thought... He shook his head. "No, I'm not going to make excuses. We thought we could pressure you into giving us what we wanted. We saw the farm as an asset, not as your home. You called me too old to understand dreams," I said quietly. "You made me feel like I was standing in the way of your future." Matthew flinched. "I know. Those words, I can't take them back. But I want you to know I didn't mean them. I was frustrated and desperate and scared." "Scared of what?" "Of failing. Again." He set the mug down and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. I've been chasing success for so long, trying to prove that I'm worth something. Every time a business failed, I told myself the next one would be different. But deep down, I think I always knew I was kidding myself. For the first time since he'd arrived, I really looked at my younger son, not the polished, ambitious entrepreneur he pretended to be, but the uncertain boy who'd always lived in the shadow of his more accomplished brother, the child who'd tried so hard to impress his father and then, after Robert's death, had floundered without that guiding presence. "Where's Rebecca now?" I asked. "Gone." The word hung in the air between us. After Jason showed her my financial history, she realized I wasn't what she thought. She packed her things yesterday, said she couldn't tie her future to someone with my track record. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of emotion satisfaction that Rebecca had shown her true colors, sadness for my son's pain, relief that her influence was removed from our family. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Matthew laughed bitterly. You were right about her, about everything. Being right doesn't mean I wanted to see you hurt." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "Why not? After what I tried to do to you, you have every right to hate me. You're my son, Matthew. That doesn't change. Even when you break my heart." His face crumpled, and suddenly he was crying deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from some place he'd kept locked away for years. I moved around the table and put my arms around him, holding him as I had when he was small, when a scraped knee or a failed test seemed like the end of the world. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I murmured, stroking his hair. "I know." We stayed like that for a long time, until his tears subsided and he pulled away, embarrassed by his breakdown. I handed him a napkin to dry his eyes and returned to my seat, giving him space to compose himself. "What will you do now?" I asked when he seemed calmer. He shrugged. "I don't know. The app is dead, even if the name wasn't already taken. We never had the technical expertise to build it properly. Rebecca was the one with the business connections." He hesitated. "I might have to move back in with a friend for a while. The apartment was in Rebecca's name, and I can't afford the rent on my own." I nodded, absorbing this information. Matthew had always landed on his feet, usually with my help. But this time felt different. This time, he seemed genuinely lost. "You know," I said carefully, "the Wilsons next door are looking for someone to help manage their orchard. Frank's arthritis is getting worse, and they can't handle it all themselves anymore." Matthew looked skeptical. "Farming, Mom? I don't know the first thing about growing apples." "You used to. You helped your father every fall when you were a boy, and it wouldn't be forever, just until you figure out your next steps." "Why would you help me find work after what I tried to do?" I considered the question. Why indeed was I falling back into the pattern of rescuing Matthew, enabling his worst instincts, or was this something else, an opportunity for him to reconnect with the land, with honest work, with the values Robert and I had tried to instill in him? "Because I believe people can change," I said finally. "Because I think it might be good for you to work with your hands for a while, to grow something instead of just trying to sell something, and because the Wilsons are good people who could teach you a lot, if you're willing to learn." He was quiet for a long moment, turning the idea over in his mind. I could see the old Matthew wanting to reject it, the Matthew who thought he was destined for bigger things, who saw physical labor as beneath him, but something had shifted in him, some of the arrogance knocked away by recent events. "I could talk to them, I guess," he said finally. "See what it entails." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was a start, a small opening that might lead to something more. "That's all I'm suggesting. Just talk to them." Matthew nodded, then glanced around the kitchen, his eyes lingering on the photographs on the refrigerator, the marks on the doorframe where we'd measured the boys' heights, the dent in the wall from when he'd tried to do indoor baseball at age 10. "This house has so many memories," he said softly. "I never really appreciated it until now. It's not too late to start," I told him. When he left an hour later, something had changed between us. Not forgiveness. Exactly, the wounds were still too fresh for that, but a tentative step toward understanding. He'd agreed to talk to the Wilsons, and to come for dinner on Sunday to meet with Jason properly, man to man, brother to brother. I watched his car disappear down the driveway, feeling cautiously hopeful. Matthew had a long way to go to earn back my trust, but today was a beginning, a recognition, at least, of the damage he'd done and the need to make amends. Jason returned from town shortly after Matthew left, his briefcase bulging with the finalized trust documents. "How did it go?" he asked, setting the papers on the table. "Better than I expected." Rebecca left him. Jason raised an eyebrow. Convenient timing. I think it was genuine. She saw his financial history and decided he wasn't the meal ticket she thought. And you believe his remorse is genuine too? I considered the question. I believe he's genuinely sorry he got caught. Whether he's sorry for what he tried to do, that will take time to prove. Jason nodded, accepting my assessment. I've got the trust documents ready for your signature. The bank has agreed to act as trustee after... He trailed off, unwilling to say the words. After I'm gone, I finished for him. It's okay, Jason. We all die eventually. What matters is what we leave behind. He smiled, a bittersweet expression that reminded me how much he'd grown up. Speaking of what we leave behind, I have something else to discuss with you. Something about my future. Your future in Prague. Actually, no. He took a deep breath. I've been offered a position with an international law firm that's opening an office in Chicago. They specialize in agricultural law, helping family farms navigate regulations, succession planning, conservation easements, exactly the kind of work I've been wanting to do. My heart leapt. You'd be moving back to the States. If I take the job, yes, I'd be about 2 hours from here. If Jason, it sounds perfect for you. He hesitated. There's more to it. The firm has a pro bono division that works with elderly landowners who are being pressured to sell to developers. After what happened with Matthew and Rebecca, I realized how widespread this problem is. How many older people are being taken advantage of by their own families or by corporations? I understood then. You want to help people like me? Yes. But I also don't want to abandon my career in Prague. I've built something there. I have a life there. And a girlfriend, I reminded him. He smiled. Eliza is actually the one who encouraged me to consider it. She's been wanting to experience living in America. She thinks she could find teaching work easily enough. She sounds wise. She is. His expression grew serious again. But this isn't just about my career or relationship. It's about being closer to you, Mom. About not missing the next 15 years like I missed much of the last 2. I reached across the table and took his hand. Jason, I never want you to make decisions out of obligation to me. I want you to live your life fully, wherever that takes you. I know, but what if being closer to home is part of living fully? What if I've realized that success means nothing if I can't share it with the people I love? The words echoed my own thoughts so closely that I felt tears spring to my eyes. Here was my son, the one who'd traveled the farthest, coming back not out of duty but out of love, not because he wanted something from me, but because he wanted to give something back. Then I'd say you've learned something important, I told him, squeezing his hand. Something your father would be very proud of. Jason smiled, and in that moment, I felt a circle completing itself, a legacy not of land or money or business success, but of values, of understanding what truly matters. I'm thinking of taking the job, he said. Starting after the new year, that would give me time to wrap things up in Prague, help Eliza plan the move. I think it sounds wonderful, I said, meaning it completely. And I'd love to meet her whenever you're ready to bring her home. We spent the rest of the afternoon going over the trust documents, making sure every detail was exactly as I wanted it. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, painting the kitchen in the golden light I'd always loved. There's one more thing, Jason said as I signed the final page. This trust protects the land from development, but it doesn't address who will actually live here and maintain the property. Have you thought about that? I hadn't, not specifically, in my mind. The farm would simply continue as it always had, with me tending the gardens and leasing the fields to neighboring farmers. But Jason was right. I wouldn't be here forever. I suppose I always thought you or Matthew might want it someday, I admitted. But you have your career. And Matthew? I trailed off, unsure now of what Matthew might want or need in the future. What if neither of us wants to live here full-time? Or what if both of us do? I considered the question. Then you'll have to work it out between yourselves. The trust gives you both equal ownership, but it doesn't dictate who lives where. Jason nodded. That's fair, but I wonder if we should include some provision for maintaining the house, even if neither of us is living in it full time, a requirement to hire a caretaker, perhaps, or to open it to the community in some way. The idea appealed to me, the thought of the farmhouse continuing to be a home, even if not for my sons, a place where the history we'd built could be preserved and shared. We could amend the trust to include that, I agreed, but let's think about it more. There's no rush to decide everything today. Jason gathered the signed papers, carefully tucking them into his briefcase. No rush at all. That's the beauty of what we've done here. Mom, we've created time and space for thoughtful decisions, not rushed ones. I looked around at my kitchen, my home, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Matthew's attempted takeover had shaken me deeply, made me question my place in my own family. But now, with Jason's help, I'd reclaimed not just my property but my agency, my right to determine my own future, and the future of the land I loved. "Thank you, Jason," I said simply. "For everything." He smiled, the late afternoon sun catching in his dark eyes. "That's what family does, Mom. Real family. We protect each other." Sunday dinner arrived with a sense of trepidation I couldn't quite shake. Matthew had agreed to come, to sit across the table from the brother he'd spent a lifetime competing with, the brother whose legal expertise had exposed his schemes. Jason had agreed to listen, to give Matthew a chance to explain himself. I'd prepared Robert's famous pot roast, the meal he'd always made when we needed to have difficult family discussions. "Do you think he'll actually show up?" Jason asked as he helped me set the table with the good china, the kind we used only for holidays and special occasions. "I hope so," I said, placing the water glasses just so. "He seemed sincere when he left on Thursday." "People like Matthew are always sincere in the moment," Jason pointed out. "It's follow-through that's the problem." I couldn't argue with that assessment. Throughout his life, Matthew had been full of grand promises and heartfelt declarations, few of which had materialized into consistent action. But something about his breakdown in my kitchen, the raw vulnerability he'd shown, made me want to believe this time might be different. "He's still your brother," I reminded Jason gently. "Whatever he's done, whatever mistakes he's made, that doesn't change." Jason's expression softened. "I know, Mom, and I'll try to remember that tonight, but I'm not going to pretend the past didn't happen either. I wouldn't expect you to." At exactly 5 o'clock, the sound of tires on gravel announced Matthew's arrival. I glanced out the window, surprised to see him stepping out of a mud-splattered pickup truck rather than a car. "That's Frank Wilson's truck," I said, puzzled. Jason joined me at the window. "Looks like he took your suggestion about the orchard job seriously." Matthew approached the door with visible hesitation, a bottle of wine in one hand and a paper bag in the other. He'd cleaned up since Thursday, freshly shaven, hair neatly combed, but the designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and jeans that looked like they'd actually been worked in. I opened the door before he could knock. "Matthew, you're right on time." "I brought wine," he said, holding out the bottle. "And fresh apples from the Wilsons' orchard. I've been helping them harvest this weekend." The simple offering, so different from the expensive takeout and corporate presentations of his previous visits, touched me deeply. "Thank you. Come in." Matthew stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Jason, who stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his posture wary but not hostile. "Jason." Matthew's voice was subdued. "Thank you for agreeing to this." "I'm here for Mom," Jason replied, his tone neutral. "She wants us to talk, so we'll talk." Not the warmest welcome, but not a rejection either. I'd take it. Dinner began awkwardly, with careful small talk about the weather, the fall harvest, Jason's flight back to Prague scheduled for Wednesday, but as the meal progressed, the conversation gradually turned to more substantial matters. "I met with the Wilsons yesterday," Matthew said, addressing me but glancing at Jason. "Frank offered me a 3-month trial position helping with the orchard and their farm stand. It's not much money, but it includes a room in their guest house." "That's a start," I said encouragingly. "What does the work involve?" "Everything from picking apples to maintenance on the equipment to running the cash register. They want someone who can learn all aspects of the operation. He hesitated. Frank says if it works out, they might consider a longer-term arrangement. They don't have children of their own, and they're getting to an age where the physical work is too much. I exchanged a glance with Jason, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It sounds like a good opportunity, I said. Honest work with good people. Matthew nodded, pushing his food around his plate. It's not what I imagined doing at 28, but after everything that's happened, he trailed off, then looked directly at Jason. I owe you an apology. What Rebecca and I tried to do to Mom was inexcusable, and the things I've said to you over the years about not being real family, I was wrong. You're more family than I've been. Jason's expression remained guarded. Why should I believe you're sincere? You've manipulated Mom for years. How do I know this isn't just another angle? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself since Matthew's tearful apology. Matthew set down his fork. You don't. Words are cheap, I get that now. The only way I can prove anything is through actions, over time. He took a deep breath. I've started seeing a therapist. Just had my first session yesterday. I've got issues to work through, about Dad's death, about my need for validation, about using people instead of connecting with them. This was new information, something he hadn't shared with me on Thursday. I felt a flicker of hope, not that therapy was a magic solution, but that Matthew was finally acknowledging he needed help beyond what money or business success could provide. That's a good step, Jason said cautiously, but it doesn't erase what you tried to do. I know, nothing erases that, but I'm hoping that someday, maybe, you both might be able to forgive me. Matthew looked at me, then back at Jason. Not now. I haven't earned it yet. But someday. The humility in his voice, so unlike the entitled Matthew we'd known, seemed to catch Jason off guard. He studied his brother for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Time will tell, he said, not unkindly. In the meantime, I think you should know that Mom and I have set up a trust to protect the farm. It ensures the property can't be sold or developed for at least 20 years after her death, regardless of who inherits it. I hadn't planned to tell Matthew about the trust tonight, but I understood why Jason had brought it up. It was a clear message we'd taken steps to ensure what had almost happened could never happen again. Matthew absorbed this information with a thoughtful expression. That makes sense. It protects the land from people like me. From decisions made in haste or under pressure, I corrected gently. The trust doesn't exclude you, Matthew. It just establishes guidelines for how the property can be used in the future. Will I still inherit part of it? He asked, his voice small. Yes, I said firmly, ignoring Jason's slight frown. The farm will pass equally to both of you. The trust simply ensures it remains a farm, not a development opportunity. Matthew nodded, relief visible on his face. Thank you. Not that I deserve it, but thank you. The rest of the meal passed in a strange kind of truce, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a cautious acknowledgement that healing might be possible. By the time we reached dessert, apple pie made with fruit from the trees. Robert had planted something in the air had shifted. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had eased enough for conversation to flow more naturally. I'm taking a job in Chicago, Jason announced as I served the pie. Starting in January, international agricultural law. Matthew looked genuinely surprised. You're moving back to the States? Yes, I'll be about 2 hours from here. That's great news. Matthew seemed to struggle with what to say next. Will you visit the farm often? As often as I can, Jason said, glancing at me with a smile. My girlfriend will be coming too. She's excited to see where I grew up. You have a girlfriend? Matthew echoed my earlier surprise. How did I not know that? We haven't exactly been in close contact, Jason pointed out dryly. No, I guess not. Matthew hesitated. But maybe that could change if you're going to be living closer. The question hung in the air, an olive branch extended across years of rivalry and recent betrayal. Jason didn't answer immediately, weighing his response. Maybe, he said finally. Let's see how things go. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a rejection either. Like everything else about this evening, it was a beginning tentative, fragile, but real. After dinner, as Matthew prepared to leave, he lingered on the porch, looking out at the moonlit fields stretching away from the house. "I never really saw it before," he said quietly. "How beautiful this place is. I was always so focused on getting away, on making my mark somewhere else, that I never appreciated what was right here." "It's not too late to see it now," I told him, echoing my words from Thursday. He turned to me, his expression serious. "I don't expect you to trust me again, Mom. Not right away, but I'm going to try to be better, to be the son you deserve." I reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the stubble that had already begun to grow since his morning shave. "Just be honest with yourself and with me. That's all I've ever wanted." He nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'll try. I promise I'll try." As I watched him drive away in Frank Wilson's old truck, I felt Jason come to stand beside me. "Do you think he means it?" he asked. "I think he wants to mean it," I answered truthfully. "Whether he can follow through, that's the question." "You're giving him another chance." It wasn't quite a question, not quite an accusation, but I heard the concern beneath Jason's words. "I'm giving him room to prove himself," I clarified. "There's a difference." Jason considered this, then nodded. "Just be careful. Mom, people like Matthew, people who've spent their whole lives manipulating others, they don't change overnight." "I know that, but he's my son. Just as you are. I can't give up on him entirely." "Fair enough." Jason put his arm around my shoulders. "And I'll be closer now, keeping an eye on things." I leaned into his embrace, grateful for his strength, his steadiness. "Our guardian angel in Chicago." He laughed. "Hardly an angel, just a son who learned from the best what family really means." We stood there on the porch as the October night deepened around us, the stars emerging one by one above the fields Robert and I had tended for so many years. Fields that would remain, protected and whole, long after I was gone. A legacy not of wealth or prestige, but of continuity, of roots deep in the soil and branches reaching toward the future. "Come inside," I said finally. "It's getting cold." Together, we turned back toward the warmth of the house, on my land, secure in my hands for as long as I chose to hold it, not because I was too old or too sentimental to understand change, but because I was wise enough to know what was truly valuable, what was worth